5:33 a.m. The cockpit is silent. All you can hear is a whirring noise and the breathing of a pilot who shouldn't be asleep. Outside, the city sleeps, but inside this Boeing 737, the danger is already awake. The plane is approaching a runway surrounded by cliffs, short, high, with no margin for error, too fast, too high. And, with a captain who does not respond, the alarms sound, the co-pilot begs, the plane is not stabilized, the system shouts, "Pull up," but nobody does anything. In less than 60 seconds, 158 people will lose their lives. But why? How a routine landing ended in a hell of fire and twisted steel. What happened inside that cabin that should never have happened? And if we told you that everything could have been avoided? This is a real story, a real flight, a tragedy, as absurd as devastating. This was the last flight of the India Express 812. Get ready to discover every second of this mortal landing. Air India Express Flight 812 was never supposed to fly that night, at least not with that crew. In the cockpit sat Captain Zglusica, a 55-year-old Serbian pilot, one of a few foreign hires brought in by Air India Express to bolster their ranks. With over 10,000 flight hours under his belt, he was no rookie, but tonight, he was dangerously exhausted. Beside him, First Officer Harbinder Singh Aluwalia, 40 years old, a seasoned pilot from Mumbai with over 3,600 hours of flight time. He had flown this route dozens of times. Together, they were assigned a simple overnight trip, Mangalore to Dubai and back again. A routine job, nothing extraordinary, or so it seemed. But the captain, he wasn't supposed to be there. The original pilot scheduled had called out. A last-minute switch, made with pen and paper as was still common at the time, placed Captain Zglusica on duty. He had just returned from vacation in Serbia, jet-lagged, off-rhythm, tired. He had been back in the country for only 2 days and hadn't slept well since. And now, he was about to pilot a red-eye flight through the dead of night. Fatigue, invisible, quiet, deadly. Meanwhile, the Boeing 737-800, barely 2.5 years old, was being readied for departure. Bags were loaded, fuel was pumped, passengers boarded, unaware that tonight, the clock had already started ticking, and the worst part? No one was ready to stop it. 1 hour into the flight, the captain gave in. He leaned back, closed his eyes, and fell asleep. Mid-flight, in the dead of night, with 160 lives on board. His breathing deepened. The only sound inside the cockpit was snoring. The first officer, now alone, had to do it all. Fly the plane, talk to ATC, prepare for descent, entirely solo. Fatigue had taken over, quietly, invisibly, and no one stopped it. Why? Because no medical check was done that night, no real supervision, just a piece of paper signed, fit to fly. And as the aircraft sliced through the darkness, fate had already begun to take shape. Mangalore Airport is not like the others. Its runway sits on a hilltop, narrow, short, with a cliff at the end. Land too late, and there's no way out. That day, the radar was down, the tower was flying blind, and only the captain was allowed to land there, a place where mistakes aren't allowed. And that day, one happened. The aircraft is on final approach, but something's wrong. They're too high, too fast. The captain just woke up. No time for a briefing, no coordination. Instead of going around, they continue. They capture a false glide path, 3 times steeper than normal, and still, they descend. They're seconds from the runway and meters from disaster. The aircraft finally touches down, but far too late. It floats nearly halfway down the runway before the wheels grab the ground. The brakes engage, but only lightly. Auto brakes set to level 2. Reverse thrust? Not fully deployed. The runway is disappearing. And then, the captain makes the worst decision of the night. He tries to take off again. Throttles surge. The engines scream, but it's far too late. The aircraft blasts through the perimeter fence and disappears over the edge. A 200-foot drop. The 737 breaks into 3 sections, fuel spills. And moments later, an explosion, flames, smoke. screams drowned in fire. Emergency crews scramble, but the terrain is unforgiving, steep, remote. The first to arrive aren't professionals. They're villagers, local farmers, men and women who ran toward the fire with no tools, just courage. They pried open wreckage, called out names, pulled survivors with bare hands. Because of them, 8 people made it out alive. The rest, trapped in the wreckage, consumed by a chain of mistakes. Flight 812 didn't crash in the air. It was lost in that final second of silence before the fall. The investigation began immediately. The crash had been devastating, the questions unavoidable. Why didn't the plane stop? Why didn't they go around? How was a sleep-deprived captain allowed to fly that night? India's Directorate General of Civil Aviation analyzed the black boxes, cockpit audio, and every second of flight data. What they found was chilling. The captain never conducted an approach briefing. He slept through much of the flight, and once awake, made a series of poor decisions alone. At the most critical moment when he should have aborted, he continued. The technical term, plan continuation bias, the refusal to deviate from a plan even when everything is going wrong. Worse, when he tried to go around, it was already too late. Reverse thrust had been deployed. That move, forbidden by procedure, sealed their fate. The final report was clear. Human error was the root cause, worsened by severe fatigue. But the blame wasn't his alone. The airline lacked medical oversight. The airport had no working radar. Procedures were vague. No one protected the passengers. Flight 812 didn't crash because of one mistake. It crashed because an entire system failed, and the cost was 158 lives. Flight 812 was meant to be just another return home, just another landing, but it became one of India's worst aviation tragedies. Not because of a storm, not because of mechanical failure, but because of fatigue, mistakes, and silence when it mattered most. Today, what remains is a painful reminder. In aviation, there is no room for complacency. Every decision matters. Every second counts. Sometimes, there's no second chance. In memory of the 158 lives lost.